What's up guys, welcome back to my channel. Today is the second day of our 100 days of React challenge. So today, new challenge that we're going to talk about, and this new challenge is solely focused on three parts. The first part is for us to write a range function that takes two arguments, start and end, and return an array containing all the numbers from start to up to and including the end. So this is the first phase of challenge that we are going to solve. Let's begin. Okay, understanding from this context, write a range function, which means you have to write a function that is named range, and this function has to take in two arguments, and the arguments are start and end. Then the same function has to compute all these things and return an array containing all the numbers from start up to and including the end, which means it has to return a sequence of numbers. Like if you are supposed to give something like maybe 1 and 10, so it has to start like 1 2 3 4 5 up to 10, so kind of thing. Or maybe if you're supposed to give 1 5, if you're supposed to give 5 10, it is just based on the sequence that you gave, so it has to iterate through it and it has to produce the sequence of the number based on like the two number, the start and end, that you're going to give. So let's start writing the code. Here, to start writing the code, first we are going to create a function. I'm actually using arrow function mostly, but it works pretty much the same with a normal function. If you're familiar with ES6 practices, then it won't really be a problem for you. But yeah, function which is called range, and the function range is going to take two things, which is start and end. Then here we need this function like to iterate through those start and end in order to produce something else. But before we can go into that, we need to have a new array, so to speak, or the sequence. We need to have the sequence stored in something else which is safe, which means we are going to create a new array, so to speak. We're going to create empty array, like suppose let result, let's just call it result, so to speak. You can call it anything though, it is not limited to that name. Like you'll say let the result equal to empty array. Then you can say like ES6, sometimes you can easily ignore things like semicolon and it won't really yell at you. So you will go ahead and iterate through the given given values. And the reason I'm coding slow is because I wanted to explain everything that I'm doing up here. So we'll say like let I, which is just like a normal way of iterating through something in JavaScript. Let I equal to start, okay, which is the start value that is going to be given. Then I is less or equal, because they said up here, if you can understand, they said including the end value, which means it has to include the end value here. So we have to use this logic in order to get that done. So I is less or equal to end, that is going to include that value. You know, for example, if we had to say 1 and 10, then it will include 10 in the iteration. But if we didn't include that part, then it will just go up to 9 and stop. That is all. That is how natural loop works when you're working with all these sort of things, you know. Then I plus plus. Now if we come down here, the only thing that we really need to do is to make sure that the value is produced from here, because now it is producing those values, like iterating through whatever we give, and it is going to produce the value. So the values that are produced from here, instead of printing it out or cancelling it out, so to speak, we are just going to like push the result. We're just going to push the result. And by the way, if you don't know how push result how push function work, you need to check it out in JavaScript documentation. It is really important for you to understand those built-in functions in order to deal with, let me say, a lot of computation when it comes to JavaScript. So we're just going to say I like this now. Like whenever the loop runs, it has to push those numbers exactly to our new array, so to speak, which we have created up here called result. So we'll just come down and return result, like that. Yep, here we are done. In order to test, or let me say to clarify our doubt, let's say console.log, then let's pass our function range here. Then let's give a range of number from start and end. You can even see like the time I just put the cursor on in the whatever it is giving, like the arguments that are needed, which is start and end. So like our start number is 1 and the end number, let's say it is 5, so to speak, like 1 and 5. Then let's run and see how it is going to like iterate through those numbers. You see it is producing for us 1 2 3 4 5. And by the way, if you're not seeing the code very well, okay, let me zoom in a little bit so that you can be able to see it that better. Like this is the code, here, and here is our output. because right now the output needed very small space, so that's why it is not really a big deal right now. So the first part of our challenge is done pretty much. Yeah, so let's come up here, the second part. The first part here, we are done. It is including that very number, which means from 1 to 5 we gave 1 and 5, and it is iterating through. And I'm quite sure you understand the concept exactly how it comes actually into play. So now let's come here and try to understand the next part. The next part says write a sum function, which means we are going to create another new function that takes an array of numbers, which means takes an array of numbers like what we just produced with our range function, and returns the sum of these numbers. Then it runs the example. Like if you are to give 1 and 10, it has to run the example. Then it has to include, or let me say, it has to produce a value 55 when it runs. Like if you have to give 1 and 10, it has to produce a value 55. Let's go again to do the challenge and try to understand what they are really requiring us to do. They said write a sum function, or write a sum function, like write a function called sum that takes in an array of numbers, so to speak, and return the sum of these numbers, which means that it has to add those numbers together. Then run the example program and see whether it does indeed return 55. Like for example, if we have given the specific values, like let me say, if we try to run here 1 and 10, the values produced from 1 to 10 are going to be 1, okay, are going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up to 10, so to speak. And those values, if we compute all of them together, then it will give us that number 55. So here the question is, like, if we put this array of numbers inside, so it has to produce for us 55, so to speak. So here let's come and start solving this challenge. First thing is we need to create a function called sum. Okay, and this function has to take in array of numbers as it is parameter, so to speak. I usually mix it between parameter and argument, so you don't need to worry about it, but mostly they say it is called parameter. So even I tried to check from JavaScript documentation, and that is the basic definition I'm getting for it, but it depends who is using it and also how you perceive it, and I'm quite sure you understand what I mean. So here we have the array of numbers. Now all we need to do is to like do something with these numbers in order to to be able to sum them together or something. These numbers are representing the numbers created out here, which means the array of numbers. So the first thing that we need to really deal with is here we are going to create a sum function, or let me say a total function, so to speak, a function that is going to contain the variable that is going to contain the total value that we are going to compute out of those numbers. So secondly, we are going to loop through the numbers up there, but here we are going to use this shorthand loop. I really like it in JavaScript. It feels like Python in this point. Like we are going to say for let number of numbers. It does pretty much the same thing with another for loop, and I really like it because we only have like one thing to loop through, so there's really no need for us to use this I something because it takes long. If you can see that aspect, we're just trying to do something which is short-handed. Yeah, and I'm quite sure you get a point. So here, like, what we are going to do here is this, because we want to produce that exact thing and we want to add those things together. Then the only thing we're going to say is this total. Okay, we set this total and add to it the number. Okay, which means like whenever the loop runs, it add that very number to the total, it add that very number to the total, and it continues until the loop stops. And when the loop stops, all the values that are produced by the number here already hold up into that total there. Then we'll come down and say, okay, now we want to return our total. Okay, this is it for this part of challenge, I'm quite sure. And in order to test how it works, we need to also use the same console.log like that. Then in console.log, instead of saying range or something, we are going to say sum. And in order to test it with these values, let's use what our range has already produced here. So we are going to say range, and we're going to put inside 1 and 10, which is actually exact value like this, and we wanted to see like how is it going to compute it together and give us the output, so to speak. So if we run it, yeah, we're getting 55. Whoa, this part of challenge is done for us. And I'm quite sure you are actually understanding exactly what we are doing, because it is so important to keep the track of everything that we are doing, because everything we are doing now is crucial for our end part, which is the bonus challenge, or let me say the last stage of our challenge. So now our bonus challenge here, something that they are requiring us to do as additional, is that like we need to modify the range function to take an optional third argument that indicates the step, okay, value used when building the array. And if no step is given, the elements will go up by increments of 1, which means it has to act normal like the way it is before, and corresponding to the old behavior, the function call range 1, 10, and 2. This is supposed to be the step, like it has to step 2 steps within each, which means suppose if it is to produce something like 1, instead it will end up producing 3, it will end up producing 5, it will end up producing 7, it will end up producing 9. That is like the kind of phase you can see here that this question is actually going toward. So okay, we already understand what they actually want us to do. So now we need to create another argument or another parameter, so to speak, inside the range function, and that has to be like an optional, it has to be like an optional argument which is going to indicate a step, and it has to take a value, but if it has no value completely, let it default to 1. That is one thing that the one modification that we need to do. Okay, let's come down to our challenge, and coming down also somehow into the explanation of the challenge. One thing that I didn't read it out loud is this: the function call range with 1, 10, and 2 should return 1, 5, and all this, like I just illustrated earlier before. Secondly, make sure that it also works with negative steps values, so that range of 5 to -1 produces 5, 4, 3, 2. You see that is a little bit intense, But anyway, before we start putting all this weight in our mind, let's first come to this question and try to indicate out exactly what we are going to do here in our function. So here we need to create a step, okay? This is the argument we need to create. A step is the argument that we need to create here. But we are just not going to put a step like that and everything is done. Because if we can see from our challenge, our step has to take a value like 2 or something and has to produce this, which is actually fine for you to understand in that context. And secondly, if it has no value, then it has to default to 1, which suppose you can just do it like this and everything is done. You have to just include 1 and everything is done. But in this case also, it is not the case. We have like more than kind of that thing in order to focus on it, because it says it has to also take negative numbers. Wow. So now let's first try this phase where we need it to iterate through, and if it has nothing, it has to like increment by 1, 1, 1, 1, so to speak. So we'll come here, then we'll have to like write the if and else statement, so to speak. And if we write the if and else statement, the major thing that we are going to focus on is to like explain if the step is greater or if the step is low, and that is like the major thing that we're going to focus on. So here, let me say if step is greater than 0. This is like the first phase that we're going to work on. If a step is greater than 0, then we need this iteration to happen, which means we need it to run through the loop and push the value and everything to happen accordingly. Then we'll just say, okay, if that happened, let this happen, else we need something else, like we'll say else. We don't really need to say, okay, else if a step is less than, not like that. We're just going to say else, then we give the specified value, like, okay, for let I, okay, is equal to start, let I is equal to start, then we'll say I is, instead of less than, we are now going to use greater than, because we are taking in negative numbers, greater than and equal, because we are going up to that end of that number. Imagine suppose instead of giving 1 and 10, we are giving 10 and 1, now like a start is greater than the end, so to speak. The start is greater than the end, and what we are going to completely focus on in this context is to make sure that, like, okay, we have this start which is too large, and we have this end which is small, and we want to use the iteration of the step in order to make sure that we step through each and it produces like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 sort of thing. So yeah, you got the idea. So here, then instead of saying like, okay, I plus plus or something, which I also forgot to put in the first whatever, we are going to say I plus equal step, which means within I add each step, so to speak, which is supposed to be there. Then it is kind of like, yeah, let me say step here, okay, here like this. And if we run this loop, it seems like it really doesn't have any problem at this point. Sorry, it really seems like it has no any problem at this time. Result, yeah, result the push, and within push we are pushing something like I, and that is it. Yeah, so it really seems like there's nothing for us to add here, but there are much sometimes for us to think about here. Now with this function, we can be able to run all the condition that we have, but one thing that we need to see is our range function here need modification, which means we're going to come up to range here, and we're going to say if start, okay, if start is greater, okay, is greater than end, if start is no, not greater, is less than end. If start is less than end, then this is like, let me say, optional chaining or something. Optional chaining where like we are going to conditionally like it works just like if and else statement in most cases. Like you are trying to tell the program, okay, if start is less than this, then let it do this, which means let it default to 1. Else, if it is greater, then let it default to -1, which means like if start is greater, it is going to default -1, then it is going to start with negative value, so to speak, or maybe a value that is actually computing something which is less, so to speak. So here, if we are to come here to our function and try to run the same function again by maybe up here, let's test this upper part by adding something like 2, and let's, yeah, that is it. And let's first run the function and see. Like it is going to do pretty much the same thing, which is 1357955. 55 is actually computing the downer part, and it really has no difference because we didn't put iteration or anything. But if we put iteration, you can easily see the changes. Like if we had to put here, if we had to put 2 and we run the function again, then you will start seeing like the value will start changing. It is not producing 25 instead of 55, because if you have to count all of this together, the value you will get is going to be 25, not 55. Okay, with that done, we know now it is working on incrementing by 1, that version which is needed. Now we need, the major thing that we need to understand is, will it work with negative numbers? So let's use 10 as our example, supposed to be the largest number, so to speak, in the side of start, then 2 to be the nth, so to speak, and let it iterate through by -1, and let's see if it will produce for us the required answer that we are looking for. Boom, now it worked for us. It is like decrementing by 1, so to speak. And from here you can see 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, and it goes on and goes on, which means our function now is working both with negative numbers and positive numbers. And if we see like the entire context of this and we try like to compute them and everything works perfect, which means our 3-part challenge here is completely done. And this is how you can write a function actually that can be able to do something complex as this. And this knowledge, I'm quite sure, like if you're going into web development, or if you're going into software development in general, working on many things, you will need this knowledge a lot in many ways, because we are dealing with arrays a lot when it comes to JavaScript, objects a lot, especially when you're doing web development, so to speak, or maybe mobile development or something like that. We always have a lot of things that we need to really talk through it. And I'm quite sure, like, yeah, this is the 3 part of our challenge, so to speak, and we have actually solved everything. And if there's one thing that maybe I'm quite sure people are wrapping their mind around, it is actually this conditional whatever here, okay, which is like optional chaining, so to speak, the one like we have to say if start is this, and instead of writing it with if, we just write the specific thing. I will explain more about this in the coming challenges ahead, but for now I'm quite sure what I have given a little bit has already shown the light for you to understand what this really means. And yeah, that is our challenge. So with this said, I'm quite sure you benefited a lot from this challenge, and you have learned some new tricks of how to deal with if and else loop and push function and many other stuff. So thank you so much for watching. See you in the next video.